In the summer of 1997, you could buy a share of Apple stock for less than $1. The company had 90 days of cash left before it ran out completely. Analysts were already writing its obituary. Less than 30 years later, that same company would become the first in history to touch a market value of $5 trillion. This is the story of how Apple nearly disappeared, and then rebuilt itself into the most valuable company on Earth. To understand the comeback, you first need to understand the fall. Steve Jobs co-founded Apple in a garage in 1976. By the mid-1980s, a power struggle with the board pushed him out of his own company. Without him, Apple drifted. 3 different CEOs came and went over the following decade. The company launched too many products, confused its customers, and watched its share of the personal computer market shrink to around 4%. By early 1997, Apple was losing over $1 billion a year. It had laid off thousands of employees. Board members quietly tried to find a buyer for the entire company, and nobody wanted it. Then came a strange twist. Apple had acquired a small company called NeXT, founded years earlier by the same man the board had once removed. Steve Jobs walked back through Apple's doors, first as an advisor, and soon after as interim chief executive. His first moves were brutal. Jobs cut about 70% of Apple's product lineup. He killed the Newton handheld device. He ended a licensing program that let other manufacturers build Macintosh clones. "We were selling a lot of crap," he later admitted. Then, in August of 1997, Jobs made his most surprising move yet. He struck a deal with Apple's biggest rival, Microsoft.
Now, I'd like to talk about meaningful partners. Apple lives in an ecosystem, and it needs help from other partners. It needs to help other partners. And relationships that are destructive don't help anybody in this industry as it is today. And I'd like to announce one of our first partnerships today, a very, very meaningful one, and that is one with Microsoft.
Microsoft agreed to invest $150 million in Apple stock and continue building Office for the Mac. When Bill Gates appeared by satellite to announce the deal at a Macworld conference, the crowd actually booed him. The partnership gave Apple breathing room. It wasn't a rescue built on charity. Microsoft had its own reasons for keeping a struggling rival alive, but for Apple, it bought precious time. With the company stabilized, Jobs turned his attention to something simpler, making Apple feel like Apple again. In 1998, Apple released the iMac. It came in bright, translucent colors at a time when every other computer on the market was a beige box. It sold quickly, and for the first time in years, people were talking about Apple with genuine excitement. Alongside it came a new advertising campaign, Think Different. It didn't mention specifications or processor speeds. It simply celebrated people who saw the world differently and let Apple's brand attach itself to that idea. The real turning point came a few years later. In 2001, Apple released the iPod, a small device that could hold, as the marketing put it, 1,000 songs in your pocket. 2 years later, Apple opened the iTunes Store, giving people a simple, legal way to buy music one song at a time. The iPod alone might have been enough to rebuild Apple's reputation. But in January of 2007, Jobs walked onto a stage and introduced something bigger, the iPhone. It combined a phone, an internet browser, and a music player into a single device with almost no physical buttons. Competitors had touchscreens before. None of them had built an entire ecosystem around one. A year later, Apple launched the App Store, letting outside developers build software for the iPhone and sell it directly to customers. That single decision turned the iPhone from a product into a platform and turned millions of developers into unpaid salespeople for Apple's hardware. By 2018, Apple had become the first publicly traded company in American history to reach a market value of $1 trillion. Steve Jobs passed away in 2011, but the machine he rebuilt kept running under his successor, Tim Cook. Cook expanded manufacturing, deepened Apple's relationships with suppliers, and grew a services business built around the App Store, iCloud, and Apple Music. In October of 2025, Apple crossed $4 trillion in market value. In July of 2026, it briefly touched $5 trillion, becoming only the second company in history to reach that number. So what actually turned things around? First, Apple stopped trying to be everything to everyone. Cutting 70% of its product line felt reckless in the moment, but it forced the company to pour its attention into a handful of products worth caring about. Second, Apple learned to sell an experience, not a specification sheet. The iMac's color, the iPod's simplicity, the iPhone's single button, none of these were technical breakthroughs on their own. They were decisions about how a product should feel in someone's hands. Third, Apple built ecosystems instead of standalone products. Once customers were inside that ecosystem, leaving it became genuinely inconvenient. In 1997, Apple was 90 days from running out of money. Today, it's worth more than most countries' entire economies. The company didn't get there by inventing a single miracle product. It got there by figuring out, almost by accident, what it had forgotten, that people don't just want technology that works. They want technology that feels like it was made for them.